Good afternoon. This is Brian Hayden again. I wanted to talk to you about another interesting topic that concerns pretty much everybody, and that's burials. Burials, prehistoric burials, burials in the Paleolithic in particular. But before getting into those, I want to mention that burials are extremely important for archaeologists because they contain a lot of information about the society that was involved in burying people. Um, One of the key indicators of inequality, and for instance, is in society is the kind of burial that people get. How many grave goods there are, how lavish the tomb is, or the burial is, and many other aspects like that. So, to begin with, we should recognize that burial for most people, or sort of what we can call universal burial, is a very recent phenomena, archaeologically speaking, probably only a few thousand years old. Up until the Upper Paleolithic, there were very, very few people were buried. Even in the Upper Paleolithic, that is 35,000 years ago to 10,000 years ago, there's only about maybe a total of 200 burials in all that have been recorded out of the millions of people that have lived there. So it's pretty obvious that not everybody was buried. And when we look at a lot of ethnographies of hunters and gatherers, especially on the northwest coast, or even some Tibetans, they didn't bury individuals necessarily. A lot of slaves got thrown out into the ocean or just thrown on a garbage heap, and poor people were probably treated similarly. In Tibet, they're not hunters and gatherers, but they had the tradition of just leaving a body on the ground and letting the animals take care of it, pretty much, animals and birds. So burial can vary enormously, and trying to figure out why various burial patterns took place is kind of an intriguing problem for archaeologists. And even and up into the Mesolithic, it's only really in the Mesolithic we start getting formal cemeteries. And those were probably only for lineages or members of small communities. At any rate, so it's 10, 15,000 years ago, or 10 or less than 10,000 years ago. So there's another form of burial that's important for archaeologists. It's called secondary burial. That's where the body is defleshed, either outside or buried in a preliminary fashion, and then the bones are dug up or collected from the surface and buried again sometime later, a year or two or some years later. And this is called secondary burial. And when we look at the ethnographies, that tends to be only done for very important families. And it's a very ceremonial occasion. It gives them time to accumulate a lot of wealth to put on a huge display of burying important individuals. And why this took place would have to take us long into the night. So we'll save that perhaps for another time. The other interesting thing about burials, from archaeological perspective, is child burials, because sometimes the children get buried with lots of wealth, and obviously they didn't earn that wealth. They didn't do anything to really deserve all that wealth, or they didn't manufacture all that wealth. So it's their parents that are providing that wealth, and many people think that this indicates a level of society that's much higher than simple egalitarian societies. So what we find in the Upper Paleolithic, and this is sort of background for the story that I was writing about Eyes of the Leopard, where we have inequalities in some families that are wealthy and some families that are poor. But so why do we portray this kind of society in a story like Eyes of the Leopard? It's because in the Upper Paleolithic, we find some extraordinarily wealthy burials. For instance, the site of Songir in Ukraine, which is, who knows what happened to that site now, but it was excavated in the past. And one of the things they found, here's an example of one burial. This is an adult, and he's covered with thousands of ivory beads along his chest, on his arms, on his forehead, probably on a cap. Each one of those ivory beads took at least an hour to make. And he was accompanied by two children as well, very important, who also had thousands of beads on their bodies. And in total, there was about 10,000 beads. And in addition to ivory spears, ivory rondelles, discs, and other ivory objects, with a staggering estimate of total labor involved of 9,000 hours. Now, obviously, the children didn't do anything to deserve that. This is an extraordinary find, but it's by no means unique. There was an adolescent boy in the French side of La Madeleine, near Les Aisies, which is sort of the area where the Eyes of the Leopard takes place, or it's modeled after that area. But this boy at La Madeleine was buried with over 1,000 dentalium shells, or tusk shells. These are small shells about this big that had the form of a tusk. And once again, these had to be traded in from the coast. On the northwest coast, these dentalium shells, the tusk shells, they were each worth at least one dried salmon. And so their exchange rate was very high. And there were many other examples of children being buried in the Upper Paleolithic. A couple of children in the Grotte des Enfants in Italy, or near Italy as well, on the coast there. And this is a very interesting pattern and shows that this society was much more complex than an egalitarian society. There's also these cemeteries, and we have to ask ourselves, why do cemeteries occur? We also have some individuals that may have been buried by very rich lineages, just to show off how rich the lineage was, even though the individual might not have been that important. So burials are really interesting for archaeologists, and I hope that you get some of the implications in reading Eyes of the Leopard, where you, as I say, you have very rich people and things that are being traded in over long distances, and which would eventually often end up in burials. So, more stuff to think about in terms of why do we bury everybody or cremate everybody, or what is, yes, why has this changed so much? These are ongoing questions for archaeologists. I hope you have fun thinking about them. And we'll talk about more interesting things next time. Take care. Bye.